All right, so that was a great presentation, Marina. Thank you so much. I love hearing this because you got to get a story from the front lines. And that's really where everything's going on that's most interesting. And one of the things Marina talked about was data, measure, measure, measure. And she's focused on that from the Alexa skill and consumer engagement perspective. I'm really focused on that at Voicebot from a consumer and business perspective at the aggregate, so on the market side. And I'm excited to be talking here today because I founded Voicebot a couple of years ago, and almost all of the activity has been around consumer applications. And there's clearly some consumer-oriented applications in healthcare, but there's a lot of really interesting business, operational, back-end applications of voice. And if you think about it, one of the first big players in the voice space was IBM Watson. And we remember IBM Watson coming about in a consumer setting with playing Jeopardy and winning. But then almost immediately after that, IBM said, okay, the way we're going to make money on this is we're going to apply it to a number of different industries, and healthcare was one of the first ones. And so I think of this as in some ways one of the key origins from the business-to-business standpoint of where voice is going to go. So just a little bit about Voicebot, so you have some perspective. How many people in here are familiar with, come across Voicebot.AI? Oh, pretty good. I like that. Thank you. You are a wonderful crowd. I'll give you a hand. So some of the things that you'll see here, you may have read, but I'm going to put it all into a broader picture, because a lot of times the story gets lost when you just see data point, news article. So what we have is we do a lot of research. So if you think about not just, we analyze a lot of other people's research as well, and that's one of the things that we've done a significant amount of. But we've done proprietary research ourselves around smart speakers. We've worked with Pullstring. You're going to hear from Mike Fitzpatrick later today, doing some commissioned research in the market. We just did one on voice commerce. We have one coming up on voice user experience. So these are all different types of things that we do, and I recommend you go and check that out. Also, we have a podcast, Voicebot Podcast, and people like Bradley and Michael and other people here have been contributors as well, and so you can check out people from the show. The first thing I wanted to do, so hopefully this will work.
Thanks to the Amazon Echo, you can do everything from ordering pizza to streaming music with a simple voice command.
Play something slow on the country music station.
Okay, here's what I have for extreme constipation.
Oh,
to
one
help
second.
relieve constipation.
One
Unless you
second
have a
here.
southern
You know what I'm finding is that I need to do this probably. Let's see. One second. I want to make sure you get the full effect. All right. Okay, so this will be, we'll just get you over here.
accent.
Step stool while you are sitting on the toilet.
That's why we're introducing Amazon Echo for Southerners. You can do everything from ordering pizza to streaming music with a simple voice command.
Alexa, play something slow on the country music station.
Okay, here's what I have for extreme constipation. To help relieve constipation.
Unless you have a southern accent.
Step stool while you are sitting on the toilet.
That's why we're introducing Amazon Echo for Southerners. It's packed with the same power and performance as our regular Echo, but built exclusively for Southerners.
Alexa, add biscuits to my grocery list.
Okay, adding flour, baking powder, sugar.
No, canned biscuits.
Why on earth would you do that? Did somebody steal all your mixing bowls?
Our new Southern Alexa is perfect for every member of the family, especially the little ones.
A cheetah is. Tiger is. A cheetah is. Tiger is. Alexa, which one is faster, a cheetah or a tiger?
That's not how you ask a question.
Please tell me which one is faster.
That's more like it. A cheetah can run up to 80 miles per hour, nearly twice as fast as a tiger.
Ha! Told you so.
Excuse me, young lady. Aren't you forgetting something?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Southern Alexa also provides accurate weather updates.
Alexa, what's the weather going to be like today?
Well, my left knee is acting up something awful, so we're probably due for a gully washer.
All right.
Southern Alexa, available in burlap and reclaimed barnwood. Monogramming sold separately.
Okay, so that's one. And that is in honor of our host today, Bradley Metrock, who is a genuine Southerner. I'm a Southerner by affiliation. I've lived there a lot. I married into a Southern family, and so I appreciate a lot of these things around humor. And I want to bring up something else. How many people here have...
I'm Matt Kirshen. I'm Andy Wood. I'm a Brit. I'm an American.
Uh-oh.
And it turns out that
I guess
I have more trouble than Andy being understood.
we
by
have
some of the...
YouTube autoplay on. How many people here are familiar with Google Duplex? Almost everybody, good. Those of you who don't know, it's an assistant that'll make calls on your behalf, those types of things. I want to show you something else, just so we give equal time to both of our big players.
Hello, Chewy.com. How can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book an order for a client. I'm looking for overnight delivery. Sure, give me 1 second. What are you looking for? Can I get 1 Kong puppy binky and 2 plush Kong teddy bears? Of course. Would you like anything else? I would like 3 cases of bacon strips. Did you say 3 cases? Yes, my client is having a backyard party. Anything else? No, that's it. Can you look up the account by the phone number? Yes, we have your billing and shipping information on account. Anything else? Yes, can the delivery person put the box inside the front door? No problem. Okay, great, thanks. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, so when we look at that, so for those of you who don't know Google Duplex, it is an assistant that will make calls and do things on your behalf. And this is going to be important. We're going to talk about this concept a little bit later. We start thinking about assistants. One was we saw in the humorous introduction, people were asking questions, getting information back and forth. This one is actually proactively doing something, and in theory, could allow a canine to order these types of things themselves. Let's see here. Let's go back to here. Okay, people recognize this guy? Does anyone recognize what is on his desk there? Echo Show, okay. Anybody recognize this guy? What's surrounding him? Okay, so I put this out here, and some of you might be familiar with Saturday Night Live has done this, a lot of other organizations, there's all sorts of these types of things. The first 2 examples, the videos, those could have been done for any niche audience, right? And they're funny. If you know what it is, you can get it. And it's more and more people now are starting to get that type of humor. This and Jimmy Fallon and sitcoms, what does that mean? That means that there's enough awareness among the general population that they can get the joke, that they understand what it is. And so that's really important. And I think about that is important in part because it is an indicator of how quickly we've adopted some of these technologies. And I really just start with this idea that when we think about voice, I want everyone to come away with, from this talk understanding that something's happening and it's profound. So the first thing that we can see is that this is by Activate Forecast, one of the analysts covering technology broadly, but is focused on this space a little bit. They say it's smart speakers as a technology are the fastest growing consumer tech adoption curve that we've seen, faster than smartphones. And in fact, as fast as the iPhone aspect of the smartphone adoption curve. So that's a really important thing where you're saying, hey, moving up towards 25, 30, 40% of the population when we're starting to get broad-based usage and awareness. What that means is this has rapidly become a significant channel, and when we think about that from a marketing standpoint, that's reach, right? But you think about it from anything, whether it's consumers or patients or customers, however you want to think about it, there's a lot of people who now not only have awareness but have access. So this is in the US, this is a survey of U.S. adults in May, and now there's more than 54 million people who have access. We don't officially do forecasts at Voicebot, but it looks like this will probably grow another 20 to 30% this year alone. So this is something that's very significant in the U.S., and I presume this is largely a U.S. audience. But I do want to point out that this also is a function of global reach. So for some of you who might be thinking beyond the U.S. borders, you might be thinking about how this might evolve elsewhere. I mean, Rowena talked about the fact that there's some big players outside the U.S., particularly in China, South Korea, that are focused on this space. It is growing very fast. Okay? And what you can see by the icons, if you're familiar with those, Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, Apple for Siri. So when you think about the smart speakers, or Apple for the HomePod in particular, you think about that, we're going to have some leveling out of the different players. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I don't want you to think that voice is just about smart speakers, because it's not. And anybody in here who's thinking about voice AI technologies, you need to be thinking about other surfaces, and that's the way we normally talk about this. So the smartphone being a really important one. So as of today, well, as of 6-8 weeks ago, 500 million mobile phones have access to Google Assistant. That's growing very quickly. In fact, there's going to be more people with access to Google Assistant than actually have smartphones. How can that be? Because Google Assistant is now showing up on feature phones in India. A $29 feature phone is going to have Google Assistant. Is that a feature phone now, or is it a smartphone if you have an assistant behind it? Because you think about all the capabilities you have behind it. Siri, a lot of people think, is Siri really playing in the space? Well, 375 million monthly active users as of last year. That's really significant. Also available on 500 million devices. And Apple aficionados have multiple devices, so it's probably still 300 or 400 million, and then they have lots of different ways to access it. Beyond that, though, voice is becoming pervasive. We're starting to see it everywhere. Right? So you think about CES 2 years ago, you think about IFA, which is the European equivalent. Everyone in the electronic space feels like they need to have voice as an option. Right? We saw last year it became required if you're in the speaker space. This year at CES, it seems required if you're in any consumer technology space and you want to be viewed as important. And if you think about it, Strategy Analytics says that in the wireless speaker space, which 3 years ago about 40% had some sort of smart aspect to it, mostly Alexa at that point, it's going to be over 90%. And a lot of the categories are going to go this way, including televisions and then cars. How many people have used a voice assistant in a car? Okay, keep your hands up. How many people think the voice assistant in the car is good? Yeah. Oh, Dave Kemp. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Those are getting better as well. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. But the other thing we're going to look at is these communal devices like the television are very different from like the watch and the personal devices. So that's something that we think about a lot. When you think about your user, you think about what is the setting. Is it going to be in more of a communal or place-based setting, or is it in a personal-based setting, and those types of things. The long and the short of this is microphones will soon be everywhere. Okay? What does that mean? So there's an implication to it, right? If you think about if microphones are going to be everywhere, and then people can talk, and you go back to what Bradley said in the beginning, it's the first thing that we have. We can listen to the voice. We can vocalize. It's our first way to communicate in any way. What does that mean? So let's talk about why this is happening. So the first thing I want to point out is this voice is faster. So type, text, speak. My daughter can text much faster than 24 words per minute. I can do about 18. So that's where you get the averages. Some people can type 100. There's no one who can really do 150. Some people can talk faster. But let's just face it. We know that it's faster. And it's not only faster to say something simple or to input something simple. It's particularly faster if it's something that's complex. And when we deal with healthcare, it's complex. Compound phrases, modifiers, all these other types of things that are really critical in the healthcare space. So you think about voice being really helpful and efficient in a lot of settings, even more so in healthcare. And it's hands-free, eyes-free, right? So people love it because you can do you can do so many things while you're doing it. You can multitask. You can make yourself more productive. You can use it in places like a physician after they've scrubbed for surgery. They can't be touching an iPad, right? So what do? They put assistants in the operating room to be able to pull up information. And sometimes it would be just much more efficient for the physician to be able to just ask a question. Another reason this is happening is because the technology's gotten so good. So I bring this slide up for two reasons. One is to say, hey, the machine recognition of language is almost at human parity, or it's getting close to human parity. In fact, what Google will say is it is at human parity, and Microsoft will as well, 95%, because you and I miss about 1 in 20 words in a conversation, right? And so that's really where that comes from. However, there's other types of things in terms of the expectations of a human, in terms of understanding meaning and those types. This is strictly just understanding what words were said, not necessarily the meaning. And so humans still have a significant advantage over understanding meaning, but the technology is good enough now that that it's functional, right? That we can feel like most of the time we're going to have a good experience. And then convenience, multitasking, all these things are really popular reasons driving this. So I wanted to transition and really talk about what is happening to give you a sense of what the data says. So let's start with smart speakers. So the first thing I want to talk about smart speakers is that they are not a fad. They're not something that people bring into their home and then just discard the month after Christmas, right? They continue to use them. So this is a study that we did earlier this year. Pullstring was part of that as well. And if you look at this, we've got about 2/3 use it at least daily, use a smart speaker at least daily once they get it. And almost 90% use it at least monthly. So these are not paperweights, right? And I think that's one of the important things that I think about when we talk about new technology. I've been through a number of these different cycles. Is it real or not? And one of the things we know if it's real is usage consistent, and does it have staying power? The other thing we look at is there are a lot of use cases. So most of this is from that same earlier study we just talked about. We tracked 17 different use cases that people have, and what we looked at was whether they use them daily, monthly, or if they've ever tried it, right? And so we can see lots of different things that people are doing, and Edison Research has done a lot of great work in this space as well. You can see just a wide variety of tasks that people are performing, and it's not just asking a question, it's not just listening to music. Those are really common everyday occurrences. But they're finding recipes, they're calling someone, they're listening to Bradley's podcast, right? So a lot of different things that people are using from a productivity standpoint, from an entertainment standpoint, and that's growing, right? So not only are the number of use cases growing, because the capabilities are expanding, but the frequency is growing. This is some research out just last month from Edison Research, and it really tells an interesting story, I think. And my view is that this tells the story very concisely around smart speakers being gateway drugs to voice. So when we start, we say, I bought a smart speaker and I used it. We already saw that data. But then we say, have you encouraged your friends to do this? Peer pressure, right? I'm having such a great experience, I want you to have a great experience too. So that transference, word of mouth is strong. So you're saying over half of people are doing that. You wouldn't want to go back to life without a smart speaker. That's interesting too, because that's up, that's an average. And the first adopters have had it more than a year. And that's the green, and the orange is people who've had it less than a year. But over 50% don't want to go back to before they had it. Well, a year ago, that was 40%. So that's even grown, right? And I can say that when I first saw that they reported this end of last June, I asked my wife what she thought about that. She said, oh, yeah, I don't want to go back. And she didn't even want the thing in the house initially. So, that's the thing. Once you start using it, it becomes something that you incorporate into your life. It becomes part of your habits, your routines, and it makes your life better. At least that's the perception. And then this last one, since getting a smart speaker, you are using voice-operated assistant on your smartphone more. And that's why I talk about this being the gateway drug. It's not that I'm just using it a lot on the smart speaker itself. I'm starting to think in other aspects of my life, can I use voice? Is voice an option? It becomes a habit just to go through this process to say, oh, would be a lot easier if I could just ask the device for this. And then people start using it on their phone. Now, that's what is going to actually close this. So last year, what we found was that voice assistant use per day was around 2.8 on the smart speaker. Smartphones was 10 times a month, so about once every 3 days. So what we're starting to see is that number is going to start moving up because we're seeing this behavior over and over again about people starting to use voice more on their smartphone. And you think about where this all started. We've had voice on phones for a long time. Started in 2011 with Siri. There were some other things before that, but that was the first place where we really had an assistant. Google had Google Now and several other named products. Now they have Google Assistant. Initially, a lot of people were not happy with voice, not because Siri wasn't amazing, but because Apple oversold it. They said it could do a lot of things that it couldn't actually do, and they also then didn't have the infrastructure in the back end to handle the load that people were so excited to use voice. Which should have been an indicator to everybody that maybe Amazon's bet on the Echo wasn't such a big gamble. So because of some of those bad experiences, they stopped using voice on the phone. But now they're getting reintroduced to it. And in fact, if you look at Apple Siri, it's tremendously better than it was a couple years ago. So I know Bradley talks about this in his podcast a lot, and he rarely has anything good to say about Siri. But I will say that it is actually pretty good for a very limited set of functions. Okay, so let's talk about this process, right? So you've got a device, and many people in the household use it together, right? So that's how you become introduced to it. And the other thing, in a household, what's happening is you have technology leaders and you have technology laggards. So you tend to have a spectrum. It's like they're not all technology forward and they're not all resistant to technology. However, what happens is because it's a communal device, the technology laggards, the people who are a little less comfortable with it, actually observe the experts using voice in front of them. And so they learn. So it's not just that they're introduced to it and they start using it, but they actually use it well from the beginning because of this observational aspect of it. And that's an important thing that I think is overlooked by many people. So you use it in the home, and then you use it on the phone. Now, a friend of Bradley's and mine, Brian Romilly, calls this pizza phone. So you can imagine Photoshop taking that phone and turning it into a slice of pizza. So here's the point. People are starting to use it on the phone, and I'm sure you've all just in your life observed more of this going on. And then over time, we become more civilized, and it gets embedded in AirPods or something else. So when you're out and about, it's not this, but it's actually, it's again, a hands-free, eyes-free experience like it is in the home. Okay, so smart speakers. Voice assistant, awareness, affinity building, and training devices. Okay? One of the key points you should come away with today. That's why they're important. I was just at a conference. There were 3,000 people at this Voice Summit. It's the first really big industry gathering of people in the industry. And there's a group of people there who will say, oh, it's all about the voice assistant. Smart speakers don't matter, right? Oh, this is just a fad, and it's just like, but the voice assistant, it's everywhere. That's what's really important. They're not right, okay? Just don't believe it. Yes, the voice assistant itself is more important than the device itself, but the device also has a role to play. And we see that in the smartphone, we see that in other technologies that we've seen before. They all have a role to play. And by the way, the number one use case is music listening. So in voice assistants, that is what's bringing people in. And where do you do your music listening? Through speakers. Okay. So I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about why this matters to the tech titans. And so it's not just that people are adopting this, but the biggest companies in the world are spending billions of dollars a year on something they are losing money on. Why are they all doing this? Okay, so here's a quick story for you. I started on the web in the mid-90s. Click was the technology for the interface. We had touch with mobile, and now we can speak. Okay, I think everybody gets that. Pretty straightforward. We had a technology innovation that allowed each of those to be more significant than just the user interface. So we had the World Wide Web, the distribution of digital content became easy, scalable. We had the cloud. If you think about the apps that you use every day, most of them wouldn't be very good without the cloud, let's face it. It's that distributed technology distribution that the cloud has enabled that have made it not only easier for us to access those devices, but actually cost-effective for the proprietors of those devices to provide the services and features that they do. In the area of voice, we're talking about AI as the back end. So now there's two things about AI. There's an AI in the front end for the user interface, and that's required in order to understand human speech. Because what we had in the past were, on the right-hand side, these are programmatic interfaces. You can only do what the developer allows you to do because it has to have a touch or a button on the screen, or it has to have some way for you to navigate. So it is programmatic input and then programmatic output. They've predefined what you can do and what you can receive. When we get to speech, we do not predefine what people can do because we let them talk. Now, the old IVR systems would predefine what it would accept. It would prompt you what you could say, and it would only accept that. The new systems around voice systems do not have that constraint, okay? And so you have AI in the front end. We also have AI in the back end, okay? Now, that's not heavily used. There are some places where AI in the back end is being used. IBM Watson is one example. We will see more of that. Usually we have AI in the front end and we have programmatic on the back end. So we think about the answers from Cigna. Those are predefined. If you're not in one of those 250, it can't help you. Now over time, they can add to it. Eventually, we're going to have AI in the back end, which will then say, if I can't answer this question, I can go somewhere else and get that. Okay. Let's talk about these three waves. So first, we had distribution. So digital distribution was really important, each one of these waves. And this idea of being able to conduct a transaction was important in each one of these waves. What we didn't really have is this concept of attention in the web, because the device wasn't always with you. It could only command your attention when you were sitting at a desk, usually, right? And so when that moved to mobile, this idea of attention became really important. And lo and behold, a company called Facebook came up and captured everybody's attention all the time. And then they sucked it up, and then some of the other players that they own mostly, but some of the others, one of the 7 apps, they control your attention. So first of all, when we move into this next phase, we're saying, okay, people understand there's new distribution, right? Because there's new types of content, particularly audio and voice content. There's new types of transactions. I could use my voice to get things done. That could be a purchase, but it could also just be completing a task. And then there's this whole idea of attention. And if you think about it, who commands your attention when you're using a voice assistant? The voice assistant. It is the gateway to everything else. It controls distribution, all these other things. And then we have authority. Now, I say over here we have authority. So Google became a de facto authority on the desktop. Okay? It was not a in fact authority, but it was de facto. When we moved on to mobile, it lost a little bit of that control. Still really powerful, but you will see that there are more players in the game when you get there. When you go to the voice assistant, there's one point of entry, one point of authority. Now that point of authority may pass you off to other points of authority, but it controls everything. So that's really important. Do you think Facebook is concerned about this? They own the attention game in the mobile world. They don't own it here. They don't have a product out yet. You know, M has gone away. They're trying to launch some smart displays. They've got to figure it out. They could become really powerful on this platform just riding on other people's platforms, but they're worried about that. They don't want to be behind some of their key rivals and potentially displaced. Okay, You think Google's worried about someone else becoming an authority, like Alexa taking up all the search? Okay, so what happened here is that in each of these previous waves, we had some of the tech titans control one of these major feature sets, right? So why do they care? They have to protect their base, first and foremost. They might be looking forward and saying, this is going to be really important to us, and so we want to be there, the opportunity, but the fear of losing position is the biggest motivator. If they didn't have that fear, and look who's not on here, Apple. Who's slow in the market? Apple, because they don't have this fear of losing position. There's an opportunity for them, there's some other things that they are doing, and they are going to be a significant player, but I want to point that out. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is agency. It's not just that we have a gateway that's controlling where we go, that's interpreting what we do and pushing us to the one answer that's going to help us, as opposed to the choice of 10 choices we have. That's what voice assistants do today, but what we see with like Google Duplex, we see with some of these other systems, is that they're going to have agency. That means they work on our behalf. They're not going to ask us before they do things for us. So if our assistant notices that we are short on cereal or household supplies, that assistant might just go ahead and reorder for us, and that would be wonderful, right? Talk about convenience. Who would be concerned about that? If you're using Google Assistant, is that purchase going to go through Amazon? No, it's not, right? And so if you think about agency, that's really critical, and that's why it's so important. All right, so the objective for all these players is adoption, and the payoff is attention, authority, and agency, okay? All right, so just a couple quick things on competitors to sort of bring this back in a conversation around healthcare. So we've got these. This is the U.S. Market share breakdown for smart speakers. Amazon has this is installed base, so this isn't sales in the year. This is how many people are using them. What's their reach? So Amazon has had a big lead because they had a 2-year lead on everybody, and everybody else is trying to catch up. They've actually had a significant amount of erosion in the first half of this year, largely because the Echoes are being bought today by people who already have Echoes, and a lot of the new people to the market are buying HomePod or Sonos, or they already have an Echo and they're buying some Google Homes just to try it out because, let's face it, these things are really inexpensive. Second thing I want to point out is don't forget about Siri. As I said, it's not just about the smart speakers. Smart speakers are important, but they're going to be ultimately a smaller percentage of the market. Siri is really the biggest used voice assistant right now. And this is the US, but this is also actually true in many other parts of the world. Not everywhere, but many other parts of the world. Google Assistant's relatively new. It's really only been on most mobile phones for about a year, maybe 15 months. So it's coming up. Alexa, I'm surprised that 13% of people using Alexa. I guess they're using it with their smart speaker, but it is starting to show up on more smartphones. And then we have some of the other players. What I want to tell you, though, is that the battle lines have formed. And so if you just think about it's someone who is not one of these big players, but is going to utilize one of these, I think you need to understand where their strengths are and where they're headed. So we've got business-to-consumer focus. We've got business-to-business focus. There are a lot of people. How many people in here are familiar with the fact that Alexa and Cortana can talk together, at least in a demo environment? Okay, so it's a pretty educated audience. Why is that possible? Because they don't really compete against each other. Amazon sort of feigns that they're going to do enterprise, but they're not really big into it. Microsoft feigns that they're a consumer company, but let's face it, where's the Zune, right? So they understood intuitively, plus their cultures were aligned well enough to do this, that this is actually probably a good thing. There's expanding pie. Some of these other players, you can start to see where are they going to play. And particularly over on the right, you see some players like Nuance and IPsoft, IBM. They're all really focused in healthcare. Even DeepMind now have a significant focus in healthcare. So it's likely that for a lot of your internal operations, for your things that are not consumer-facing, you will be using those. For some of your consumer-facing applications, you might use IPsoft or Nuance, probably not DeepMind or IBM. Most likely, though, you need to think portfolio. Touching your customers, your patients, think your left-hand side of the screen. You're talking internal operations, the right-hand side of the screen. Okay, so very quick implications for healthcare. Clinical use is already happening. Study last year, late last year, was sort of published early this year, was that physicians are not only interested in using voice assistants, they already are using it in some way in the clinical. A lot of it's just voice recording, those types of things to take notes. But you can imagine that once you start the habit using it in some way, you're going to use it in more ways. Clinical applications are expanding as well. So we think about Watson, what they're doing in imaging, but in cancer research, other places. So the application, and some of this too is there's the AI in the background, but the voice as well, to be able to ask the question, to sift through the data, to get the critical information faster. We've got treatment adherence. So one of the biggest problems in healthcare, obviously, is you prescribe a regimen to a patient and they don't follow it. So this way that you have these tools that they can interact with and that doesn't require them to have a lot of sophistication in order to be able to follow their treatment plan. We've got health reporting and answers that are being used internally within organizations. So this is Amelia from IPsoft. So not a well-known voice assistant, but been around a long time, avatar-based, very sophisticated. And then we have this concept of aging in place. This is the LEQ, which is designed for the elderly. There's a whole video, if you want to see that, going online. It's kind of humorous. I'm not sure they intended it to be. But again, there's this, if you think about what these tools can do, particularly for the elderly and for people with disabilities in the home, I think about a friend of mine. He started a business around helping the elderly and the blind introduce Amazon Alexa into their lives because it made such a big difference in his mother's life. She had macular degeneration. She had always been a voracious reader. All of a sudden, he opened up her life again to content. And so I just want to say that we go back to this and say, okay, so for healthcare, think about this. You have to distribute content. You have to give access to content. You have to transact. You have to interact. You have this concept of attention or connection that you might have. Authority or providing information, agency or assistance. These are all considerations you should have. And these, and particularly in the bottom two, there's really a new opportunity around voice assistants we haven't had in the past. So you have to think well beyond what you've already implemented in your other digital channels to say, we can do something really new and different here. And I'll just leave you with this thought. So everybody in healthcare, this is true of everybody. What's your best Valentine's date? Pick one of the voice assistants because that's who you're going to be married to over the next 20, 30 years. That's all I got.
We've got time for maybe two questions before our next speaker. If you want to ask one, use the mic on either side.
Thanks. That was very entertaining. Have you tried segmenting your adoption data a little bit more beyond just a general consumer space, like into providers, let's say? In our experience, providers have a very different adoption profile than physicians are quite cautious to the point of being technophobic. First, have you looked at the numbers and any suggestions as to how to combat that?
So the only data that I know around provider adoption is the physician adoption numbers that I showed from Europe. If there were more, I would show them. So the answer is no. I don't know widely about that. It tends to be more some of these business-to-business companies like IPsoft and Nuance that have done work in hospitals. So that's where I would look to find that information.
So just to put it in perspective, Nuance has a PowerScribe 360, which is used by radiologists to dictate reports. It took them more than 15 years, and their penetration is still below 80%. So it's long.
Yeah, Nuance is interesting. By the way, if you guys don't know Nuance, they are a $2 billion company. They're actually, in many ways, they're certainly the biggest company in voice and the business-to-business side. So if you don't know about Nuance, you should know about them. They're really famous for transcription. Most medical transcription that's dictated is done by Nuance today.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
That's great. My name is Trip Peak, and I run an early-stage venture fund, and we are involved in healthcare across the board. One of the things that we recently saw was a poll that said, who do you most trust with your healthcare data? And in that poll, they offered up your provider, your payer, Microsoft, all the tech companies.
Right.
You know what the answer was?
Who?
Apple. And two things. One, they don't resell your data.
Right.
Number two, they sort of got some play around the fact they wouldn't even let the FBI break into the phone
That's right.
in the terrorist incident.
Right.
So it's interesting to think about healthcare, and would love your comments on it. You talked about sort of where people are as a consumer-facing entity, but how much do you think Apple can play on that special relationship they seem to have with people around the data and the confidentiality?
Great question. I think Apple has a role to play. One of the things I wonder about with Apple is access. Because the price points are so high, they're not accessible to everybody out there. And so I think ultimately that becomes part of the conversation, the economics with Apple. It doesn't surprise me. I've seen other things around Apple Trust Scores. Amazon also does well in Trust Scores. And so interesting that they have a new health initiative competing against some of the people in this room now. So Apple will absolutely have a role to play. I suspect it'll be more within facilities than outside. And then for select few people, they'll be able to access through an Apple device. But I think the issue ultimately is so many people are not Apple. So 85% of the world is not Apple. 60% of the US is not Apple. So for anybody to standardize on that platform, particularly since it's closed, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to have to be a cross-platform solution.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much. That was excellent. My name is Kate Burke. I'm a practicing emergency physician, and I just have a comment and then a question.
Sure.
And my comment is just about provider adoption. And what we have noticed since all of the smart speakers and our patients and their families utilizing voice as a common way of communicating, that patients are extremely interested, along with providers, in having patients actually record our encounters. And this, to me, is really, truly a blockbuster drug of this century, where patients now are becoming accustomed to using voice. They're recording what traditionally has been completely lost up to 70 or 80% of the time. And the granularity and value of this information to patients cannot be really overstated. So I've been practicing for about 35 years, and this movement with voice in healthcare, the voice of the clinician, the voice of the patient, and all of the exciting work you've presented is, to me, one of the most exciting things that we're seeing now in this space. And that leads to my question,
Sure.
which is, where have you seen the intersection of taking real-time clinical information and mixing it with the use of whether or not you're using voice bots or a clinician reporting their visit to the patient, which also includes setting up further appointments, getting devices, prescribing pharmaceuticals, and then mixing this with the ordering and all of the other features of that patient's journey that could be done so much more seamlessly and really cut out a lot of the costs that we're encountering now in our supply chain. Thank you.
Great question. Amazon is interested in the ordering process, by the way. One of the reasons they're in healthcare. Amazon Pharmacy, it's tough to grow. They own so much of the market. They need new categories. That is a great question. So what you mentioned a lot of different things. What you did is basically a full cycle, a life cycle, patient life cycle, or care cycle is the right way to say that. I've never seen those all together. Everything's siloed. So doctors using Watson for information or accessing IP software for medical record information, that happens. Nuance for medical dictation to add to the medical record, but again, a different solution because that's based on the old Dragon system that so many people have used for years. Ordering, nobody. I'm glad you brought that up too, but like a company called Sensely has an avatar that people can actually record while they're at home. They can record how they feel, and they can do self-diagnostic and upload that in a simple way, and that they found that the adherence to recording that data and the accuracy of it's much higher when they move through that. So I think so there's two things I would say about your questions and your comments. One is we don't see it all together as a single package today. It's siloed, and so that's going to take some time to integrate or for someone to do a full life cycle approach. I think it'll probably wind up still being siloed but integrated. And the second is, and I think it goes back to this critical point, is its readiness. So there's consumer readiness around the technology. They've been waiting for it, right? We just didn't have the right solution for them. And so that's what we see at the smart speaker adoption. That's what we're starting to see much more on the phone, that people are accustomed to doing this, and so there's starting to be an expectation. And what we've seen for the last 20 years is this conversation, well, really 15, this conversation around the consumerization of IT. And so what happens is what you become accustomed to in your personal life, you then take into your professional life. The expectations that you form in your personal life, you then take into expectations around what you should be able to do in your professional life. And so that's really where I would say that this is headed, in that a lot of the providers, the physicians, other people in healthcare administration and patients all are going to start having this expectation they should be able to use voice. And there's a lot of really good reasons to allow them to do it, because what we see is time and time again, the numbers, the performance, the efficacy, the effectiveness, all those things go up when you have this type of more engaging interaction, plus this more seamless interaction that can really reach out to people who are not particularly good at or comfortable using technology, or are not particularly comfortable using technology in English. So all these things I think are important. It's a really great question. I thank you so much. This has been great. Happy to talk to people. I work with a lot of companies that are adopting voice. I'm happy to share what I've learned if that's important to you or anybody else. I talk to a lot of investors. They're always asking for tips. So thank you so much. I hope you learned a lot.